This is Spellskies MTG, and today we're looking at how to compete against faster decks in your meta. So why might you want to compete with faster decks, and also why might you want to make them faster. So often you're going to win more if you have a faster deck. This is because you're able to get into the game more quickly and be able to dig into your plan, set up a value engine, and start trying to find a way to win the game. So how might we go about this? So one way you can go about it is adding more ramp to your deck. So if you have less than 10 ramp spells, try and add more. And increase the number up to 10. I like to keep around 10 for most decks. So keep that number around there. Too low, and you're not going to have any ramp in the early game, and you're going to fall behind. Another thing is more efficient ramp. So swapping out 3 or higher CMC ramp cards to 2 or less. So swapping out Commander Sphere into an Arcane Signet, for example, or a Cultivate into a Rampant Growth. 3 CMC may be fine, but 2 CMC is better because you can play a 4-drop on turn 3 with 2 CMC ramp, but you cannot do that with 3 CMC ramp. It depends on the deck. My Dragon deck has 4 CMC ramp and 3 CMC ramp. That's because the commander costs more, and there's not really much to cast in the early game other than a couple of setup enchantments which help us draw cards. So keep the ramp down at 2 CMC or less with Sol Rings and things like that. Another thing you can do is lowering your mana curve. So on websites like Archidekt, there's a graph, and it tells you your average CMC. This should be between 2.5 and 3.5 CMC. So put 10 ramp cards in the deck with that, and 3.5 or higher needs at least 14, so you can cast your spells when you need to. So having a lower curve allows you to cast more spells and be more mana efficient. So let's say you've got 5 mana turn 4 because you played a 2 CMC ramp card on turn 2. So you can cast a 3 CMC and a 2 CMC with that mana. But if your deck had a high mana curve, you might have a 4 CMC card in your hand instead. So you may be stuck with that higher CMC card, which you don't want to. So you end up wasting mana. Being as mana efficient is the best way to go. Unless, of course, you're saving up mana for a counterspell or something. That's entirely different, but make sure you're being as mana efficient as possible. Another thing you can do is adding cheaper removal and counterspells. So you should stick to 2 CMC or 3 CMC. Try not to go any higher. Decimate used to be good, but it's not as good as it used to be. Even though it gets rid of 4 permanent types, it just costs a bit much now. So, unless of course you've got Sinus for there, unless you've got it for synergy purposes like Terastodon in the Blink deck, that's entirely different. So, having cheaper removal spells, so things like Reality Shift are very cheap, they're versatile, and of course instant speed, which is very important. Things like Beast Within and Chaos Warp are also incredibly helpful because they remove any permanent type. They're also instant speed, so you can remove attackers, combo pieces, value engines. You can just generally remove a lot of things with removal spells, and avoid taking 12 damage early in the game because your board isn't established enough. However, your opponents may be. The next thing is having blockers. Things like Reclamation Sage, as I said in removal, having more cheaper removal. So Reclamation Sage is removal on a creature. That creature can be used to chump block a large attacker, for example. So something like, I don't know, humans deck attacking you with 3 humans, one of them's a 5/5, you can block the 5/5 and avoid taking 5 damage early on the game, which can be quite bad. 5 damage is quite a lot just to take early on in the game when you haven't got a board set up. So having smaller creatures you can have early on in the game is very important. So include effects, obviously include creatures with effects on them, so like Magus the Wheel in a wheel deck. You can play it as a blocker if you need to, if a deck's way out of control. And so like, for example, an Infect deck, you need blockers because you could just lose on turn 3, for example. Blockers dissuade attackers early on in the game, and if people do come around and attack you, you can jump block them. and not take any damage at all. The next thing is board wipes. These are best against large board states early on in the game, because they can clear multiple creatures and allow you and your other opponents to catch up and perhaps take that player down a peg. These are best at 4 CMC like Wrath of God and Day of Judgment. However, there are some better ones at lower CMC like Toxic Deluge, which is more on the expensive side, where you pay X life and each opponent gets each creature gets -X until end of turn, and it costs 2 and a black. There's also Blasphemous Act, which is probably the best of them. It costs 1 less to cast for each creature on the battlefield. It costs 8 and a red and deals 13 damage to each creature. That's very effective because you can cast a spell after board wipe. So you're not just taking your turn completely off to cast the board wipes to allow you to catch up with the player who's ahead. Now all of these together will make your decks faster, and will also stop other decks who are faster than yours from going so far ahead that you just can't catch up. These things will help fight against faster decks. They won't be able to stop faster decks, but also including more counter spells can help against fast decks as well, because you can stop their early game ramp and stop them from getting off to incredibly fast starts, like I've seen in my playgroup recently, which is why I made this video, where there's a player who's very good at making fast decks, so I came up with this list to try and combat that. So I'm going to say thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Goodbye.